Hey all, FilthyRobot here, doing an early access deep dive of the Man-at-Arms. As always, we're trying to start with the stats and skills and then move on to the specialties of the character and end with the summary. Let's get right into it. At 51 HP, quite on the tanky end, a lot more HP than a lot of the more damage-oriented characters designed to be in the front ranks with that amount of HP. And at 2 speed, the slowest character currently in the game, I think tied for slowest anyways. Resistance profile is fairly unexciting. The big abnormality is stun resist, which hasn't been super useful quite yet. Maybe it's okay on a defender character to have high stun resist, but I haven't found it be super useful. But the rest of it is fine, right? There's no big holes in there. Bleed, blight, burn, all 30%, standard, disease 30%, a little bit extra movement resist at 30, and standard debuff resist. So kind of average resistance profile. I'd rather the stun points were assigned somewhere more useful, but still fine. All right, let's move on to the skills. Basic auto attack is Crush, position 1-2 only, which is actually a really big restriction for the Man-at-Arms. Man-at-Arms is pretty nice about playing in position 3 or 4 if need be, so losing Crush in position 3 hurts quite a bit. The damage is pretty decent starting at 4 to 8, upgrades to 6 to 9, which is the nicer end of that. It is a 1.5 average as opposed to 1 average, which is the nicer upgrade. No crit damage added to that though, and the low end, I like the low end stuff, which is consistent damage. Gives guard if target has combo is actually almost a downgrade to this ability. The Man-at-Arms has so many ways to generate, excuse me, I said guard and meant block. The Man-at-Arms has so many ways to generate block already that stealing the combo enabler is kind of a downgrade for this skill. What I generally find what I do with Crush is I like it early game for damage, and then as it falls off, I just never upgrade it and use other skills for what they're doing. So I actually think this may be one of those skills where the upgrade is actually worse than the base skill by and large. But, you know, the damage matters. All right. Rampart is their second skill. This is a movement skill. You move forward and daze the target that you hit. It's pretty low damage at 3 to 6. The upgrade doesn't do a lot for it, just 1 instead of 1.5. The crit chance is super low. The upgrade does change in addition to dazing, it will stun if the target has a combo enabler. There's not a lot of ways to apply stun, so that's a totally reasonable ability, but I haven't found a lot of reason to upgrade this. I rarely care so much about the knockback. Again, part of this is the early access, the limited number of enemies, and the lack of information we're getting from the enemy abilities through the basic game. So it's really hard to have a sense of what enemies care about being moved and how much of an impact does it have by moving them. So mostly I'm using this to move my pieces around in a way that enables their skills better. And the daze is kind of icing on the cake for that, and the stun just rarely comes into play. I wouldn't recommend upgrading this or particularly early or maybe even ever on this character, and it's fine. I often run it, not because I want it, but because the limitations of Crush are so bad that I would rather have a damaging ability that I can use in position 3 that changes my position than a nuke that I can rarely use efficiently. So, kind of meh on Rampart, but still often on my bar, even if I don't really like it. All right, Defender, this reads pretty good, and this was one of the basic abilities that the Man-at-Arms did in the first game, was he protects another character. Here, he applies guard to the character and applies block to himself, which is a damage reduction, 50% damage reduction per hit with 2 stacks of that. Again, I think there's just better ways to get block on the Man-at-Arms, and I haven't found guard to be good outside of basically the oh shit moment of, oh, my character's at 0, I don't have a healer coming up, and I need it not to die. And it's okay in that scenario, but most of the time I'm not putting this on my bar, and I don't think the upgrade is worth it at all. Although tier 2 block is a hell of a lot better than tier 1 block at 75% damage reduction instead of 50. I just don't think the upgrade's worth it. I don't think 3 charges of guard changes anything. Like, maybe if it had like a small heal instead of a 3rd charge of guard, that would be more exciting as an upgrade, but I basically can't justify upgrading this at all. All right, next up is Bolster. This gives a charge of block to the Man-at-Arms. Upgraded version gives a charge of upgraded block. It removes vulnerability from your entire team, and it has, on the upgraded version, also removes horror from your entire team and has a 50% chance per character of removing a stress point. I don't like this ability. This feels like a budget version of the Plague Doctor Ounce of Prevention. The 50% modifier is actually really annoying, so really you only ever want to use this if every one of your characters has a at least one stress pip because you're trying to make sure that you get some value out of it. I like targeted guaranteed effects as opposed to effects that are better over time, especially with the way recovery works in this game. So to get this to be on average useful, you need to cast it a number of times to deal with the variance that comes into it. Oftentimes recovery in this game is maybe 1 to 2 actions per fight, and you really want those to be impactful actions. I don't think removing vulnerability is super great. I do like the way that the game seems to be designed. You're going to have a lot of options that are useful at certain times across the course of a run, as opposed to something being good all the time or none of the time. So there might be comps that you run that have a lot of skills that generate vulnerability, or some specific fights that you want to bring this ability in for because vulnerability is such a problem there. But by and large, I'm not excited about Bolster. It just hasn't performed well for me, and I'd rather be spending my my action economy somewhere else on the Man-at-Arms. All right, moving on. Hold the Line. I like this one. This is a movement effect for the Man-at-Arms that can't be cast in position 1, but anywhere except position 1 can be cast, including position 4, which is super relevant. It does decent damage at 3 to 6 starting. The upgrade isn't particularly exciting. The crit chance is 10%, stays at 10%, and it moves the Man-at-Arm all the way to the front and applies Immobilize, which is a really interesting status effect. It's considered a negative status effect, which matters for some skills and some abilities, but it basically takes that rank out of the game. So if you move to rank 1 and then immobilize yourself, and a person in position 2 utilizes a forward movement skill, they don't move into that rank at all. It has some weird things. It's kind of hard to visualize because it seems the best way I've found for visualizing it is just act like a character with immobilize on a rank, act like that rank doesn't exist. And that's your best way to kind of mentally envision how that mechanic works. But I really like immobilize as a status effect. It's surprisingly useful in a number of scenarios, not only just like passively, like occasionally dealing with some movement orienting effect, but also kind of nice for positioning characters and keeping them in position. So a lot of skills, I'm thinking like lunge and duelist advance, the payoff for the skill is a high impact ability, and the cost is they move to a location where they can't use that again. But if you have a bunch of immobilizes on your team, you can just use that skill again because you haven't lost the positioning that you need to use that. So I really like Immobilize as a status effect. I think it's one of the more interesting status effects they've added. Does all sorts of neat things for your team. The rest of the ability is pretty decent damage, applies 1 to 2 stacks of guard depending, and then has the upgraded version, a stun with combo. I actually think that in general, if you need to use a combo point, there's a couple really strong ways and a lot of really bad ways to use combo points. And I think stunning a target is a pretty decent use of a combo point. So I like this ability all around. It starts good. It gets much better as you upgrade it. It plays nicely into what Man-at-Arms wants to do. If he gets knocked out of position 1, it lets him recover that. If you're playing in a dancing comp, then not only does this bring you back from the back ranks to the front where you want to be on the Man-at-Arms, it also kind of it enables the other forward effects from your team to be even more efficient. Really like this ability. Super flexible, just really cool build around, really unique design. Probably one of my favorite abilities on the Man-at-Arms. All right, moving on. Bellow. This is standard in the sense that it's fairly boring, but it's a fairly efficient ability. I think you have access to this very early on the upgrades. You might have noticed too that the Man-at-Arms starts really boring in my opinion. Like their abilities aren't very good. They're very one-dimensional, and then they get much better with the unlocks, and the unlocks are really exciting, which is kind of interesting. The Man-at-Arms is one of these characters that started off really unimpressive for me, and then as I invested time into their storyline and resources into their storyline, their unlocks made them a really interesting character from my perspective. Bellow is one of these abilities. Bellow is a fairly solid effect. It removes riposte, which there's not a lot of things that do without triggering riposte, which is nice, but really situational. It's an AoE attack for the opponents that you can use from any position that applies a -3 speed debuff, which is nice because guaranteeing or making it more likely that your characters act first across multiple rounds is a really positive, powerful buff. And with the way that tokens work in this game, the fact that you can remove dodge as an AoE effect with this, where you might remove dodge from one target, debuff one target, and remove riposte from another target, makes it a really efficient action economy ability. I use this ability a lot, especially in the early game. I don't think the upgrade really changes much. -5 as opposed to -3 is a bit more consistent for sure. but I rarely find myself going out of my way. I'd rather upgrade different things on the Man-at-Arms, and I often will take this off my bar towards the later portion of any particular run. And I don't think removing crit as this ability, it's okay, but it's so situational where that's useful. So I like this ability. I don't think you need to waste point upgrading it, but yeah. All right. Retribution. This is super cool. This changes the way the Man-at-Arms plays, and I like this skill. Starts off okay. It taunts yourself and applies 2 stacks of riposte. The riposte is a lot less exciting on the Man-at-Arms. The Man-at-Arms does a lot less damage, and you tend to itemize the Man-at-Arms for survivability as opposed to damage. Like you itemize the Highwaymen for damage, so riposte tends to just be better on them. But I still like this effect. I like taunt. I think taunt is a really cool effect in this game. And this applies 2 stacks of taunt and 2 stacks of riposte, which just gives you some value. The biggest issue with Retribution is it doesn't do anything upon cast, so you don't hit a target. You can't remove a status effect cheaply. You can't check someone at death's door, etc. Right? And the upgraded version is very good. Two stacks of block to go along with your taunt and your Retribution is a really nice upgrade. It's a very valuable upgrade for my thoughts on this, and I do use this ability all the time on Man-at-Arms and quite like it. All right, moving on, Command. This is another one of these abilities that doesn't quite work for me. It feels a little bit like Emboldening. It's like a better Emboldening Vapors. So it gives the same status effect as Emboldening Vapors, which it gives 50% extra damage to a target you cast it on. And it removes blind, and there's a lot of sources of blind in the game, so that isn't bad. So if you have a character with a disease that regularly applies blind to them, then this ability starts getting a lot better. But it still doesn't do that much. The action economy on this is still pretty bad. You spend an action to give another target, generally a damage dealer, so you might get more value out of the 50% than you might otherwise because the Man-at-Arms isn't doing the same damage as like your Highwayman, for example. But the action economy here isn't that great. You remove a chance that they miss and give them a little bit of additional damage at the full cost of an action for yourself. I think you're only, and the upgrade really isn't much of anything, right? I'm not even sure if that is an upgrade. Like, does that do anything? Oh, it removes the cooldown. Right. So you get the same number. I feel like the upgrade should be like multiple stacks of plus 50% damage or something, because really, this is an ability that you're never going to use on cooldown. Because what are you spamming it on? You're going to spend an entire action every round to enable the leper to attack every round? And if not, how are you getting blinded every single round? So I think very situational. You need opponents that throw out blind regularly or lots of blind effects generating on your team. And it's so action inefficient. Another one of these abilities that doesn't really work, in my opinion. All right, Stand Fast. I like this ability. This is one of the new stance abilities. Stances are really cool. So you have to be in position 1 or 2 to use this. What happens is it immediately applies 2 stacks of block to your character, and then it's a buff. So then the next 3 rounds you generate 1 stack of block. The upgraded version is very good as well. It removes combo, which is kind of whatever. It's situationally useful, but not regularly useful. But the really big payoff is upgraded block is way better than regular block, 75% reduction instead of 50% reduction, which is awesome. I like this ability, and this ability enables some kind of unique Man-at-Arm things. It's still a full turn to do this, but if you're getting 5 stacks of block out of this, I think it's 5, might be 4, but I think it's 5 stacks of block out of this. That's starting to be decent. It's an upfront investment, so short fights it's often not worth using. But versus a boss, for example, especially a boss that has something like Maws of Life or these other front rank big nukes, this starts to be really valuable action economy wise, and it does some really cool things for the Man-at-Arms, which we're going to get to in just a second. This is probably my favorite Man-at-Arms ability. This ability is weird. It's cool and it's weird and it's unexpected, and I love it. It's hard to use, first of all. You can only be in position 1, although Man-at-Arms has ways to guarantee being in position 1. I think, what was it? Was this one? No, where is it? There it is. Hold the line, right? Guarantees you be in position 1. You move to the front and then immobilize yourself. So you can get to position 1 when you want to. Has a super long cooldown, so you can't use this regularly, which is too bad because it would be lovely to use this regularly because it's like a much better point blank essentially. And then it has 2 effects. It has decent damage at 3 to 6, upgrading to 5 to 7. Not incredible damage, but decent damage. And then you get 200% damage if you have both blocks on yourself. And these blocks do stack. So you can have 50% block and 75% block on your character. And if you do that, this is a 300% damage skill, which is a huge nuke. And It's kind of weird because it removes 1 stack of block, and when you apply a vulnerability is like the opposite token to block, so it will remove 2 stacks of block essentially by doing this. But these damage effects do stack. So it's this really cool, and there's a high crit chance on it too. 20% crit is a lot on the upgrade for this, right? So it's this really kind of cool nuke that the Man-at-Arms can like throw out from time to time. So if you take the time to enable like block generation through probably your stand, what is it called, stand fast ability, then you get to use this from time to time. I don't know if it's worth borrowing. I don't know if it's going to be efficient, but I love the design of this. It's something you think about, and it's in the back of your head, and you're like, maybe I can build a Man-at-Arms and nuker. And in some fights, you just really want that damage in front rank, and maybe it's good versus bosses because you suddenly take a character who's mostly about absorbing damage and put them into a situational damage dealer where once every couple turns they can throw out a big nuke. I love this ability. I think super cool design. Really excited to see something like that. Very late unlock again. So like the Man-at-Arms is fairly boring without a lot of unlocks, but once he gets a bunch of unlocks, he does some really interesting things between Retribution, Stand the Line, and Courageous Abandon. Anyway. And then finally, Strategic Withdrawal, another very interesting design decision. Like this skill is cool. It again, medium damage at 3 to 6 and 4 to 7. The upgrade's not super good for damage, but it does so many different things. And the upgrade really changes the way the skill applies. So first of all, it moves you back, and moving back is good. Moving back enables, moving back is situationally good in the comp you built it in, right? So sometimes you're going to want characters that synergize nicely with this moving back. And applying combo is valuable. So this does damage, and it doesn't do weak damage. It does kind of medium damage, and applies combo. Combo is a very valuable payoff with the right comp. Moves you. Movement effects in general are pretty good because you build your comps around them to take advantage of that movement. And then the upgraded version of this heals you if you're on death's door and applies speed and an extra guard stack or extra block stack, tier 2 block stack if you're on death's door as well. Now that's unique because the Man-at-Arms doesn't have any self heals, and having a tank class that stands in the front have an ability that both does damage, applies combo enablers, and heals itself when it's weak is a really interesting set of moves. I don't know how strong it is yet. It's another one of these skills. Man-at-Arms was one of my last full unlocks through my playthroughs, so I haven't played with this all that much exactly, but it reads as really unique and interesting, and I love skills like that because it gives you a lot of replayability when what the character does changes based on the skills you're running in a meaningful way. So then you're itemizing differently, playing the character differently, building the comps differently. So not only is it just boring old Man-at-Arms, stand in the front, get hit a bunch. Now it's stand in the front, get hit a bunch, run out, throw out nukes occasionally, and have increased sustainability while doing something unique. While enabling combos, basically. I like this ability, super cool. So for me, the Man-at-Arms was a very high cost to unlock, but once they got unlocked, they're really exciting for abilities like Strategic Withdrawal or Courageous Abandon and Stand Fast. These are all really cool abilities that are super late in the unlocks for Man-at-Arms. All right, so I'd probably give this character an A rank, maybe B rank because it takes so long to come online. Although you are starting with the Man-at-Arms unlocked, his basic starting kit is pretty weak and pretty dull. He plays fairly well in nearly any position for trash fights, but once you start getting into boss fights, he doesn't play very well in the back ranks. He can cast a lot of his things from the back ranks, but they're very unimpactful casts in the back ranks by and large. Probably with the exception of, I think, Riposte Retribution, which is his Riposte enabler. That's any position. So that's okay versus boss fights in the back rank, but it's still not incredible because his nuke, his auto attack that is triggered off Retribution isn't very good by and large for that. All right. Oops. Turn some of these off. We'll just leave it stacked up. All right, so to finish the conclusion for this character, probably a B tier character, much better with unlocks, takes a bit of investment to get going, not just a tank, which is fun, and has some really neat damage builds as a whole, and then the block generation builds are also super awesome. So a much more exciting character once you dig deeper into them than they start off with, which is what I like seeing that. That means there's going to be some replayability for this character. Anyways, hope you liked it. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you soon.